Right. So welcome to our webinar hosted by the American Public Human Services Association in partnership with EY. Today's webinar topic is how modernizing the grants process can reshape community impact. Next slide, please. So my name is Adrian Saldana, and I'm an organizational effectiveness consultant at APHSA. I'd like to take just a minute to share with everyone the work that we do for and with our members. APHSA represents state, county, and city human services agencies from across the country. We're a bipartisan organization with a focus on building common ground and generating practical solutions that work for people and communities. Next slide. We aim to advance the well-being of individuals, families, and communities through three core channels: influencing modern approaches to sound policy, building the capacity of public agencies, and connecting leaders to accelerate learning and generate practical solutions. Our vision is one of thriving communities built on human potential. Next slide. So speaking of connecting members, I want to make sure everyone knows about the APHSA conferences that we're hosting in 2024 in Arlington, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, Aurora, Colorado, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. While these may seem a ways off, the call for proposals for our National Human Services Summit already closed on February 16th, and our other conferences will have their calls for proposals launching in the coming weeks. You can visit the events page at aphsa.org throughout the year to learn more about these conferences, including registration dates, keynote speakers, and sessions. So just a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and it will be circulated shortly to all the registrants. During the webinar, we're requesting that you put your questions for our presenters in the Q&A panel rather than using a typical Zoom chat feature. Our panelists will try to type responses to as many questions as they can live, but we'll have time at the end to answer questions. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Jerry Cully, Senior Manager, Health and Human Services Lead at EY.
Thank you, Adrian. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Very happy to have you here. I'm excited about this webinar today. This project in particular is one that in my career I've seen to be one of the most impactful at a community level at a time that was very, very vulnerable for many of us. So I hope that you will definitely enjoy the story, enjoy the successes that you hear about this, and maybe take things away with you as you continue to work on your grant programs in your states, local counties, entities, etc. I have the great privilege today to have a webinar with Angela Madero of Hillsborough County, Florida, and my esteemed colleague Amy Fenstermacher at Ernst & Young EY. I'm not even going to attempt to go over their backgrounds. I will not do them justice. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we'll get right into it. So Angela, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Angela Madero. I work for Hillsborough County Social Services. I've worked for our department and the county for 20 years. Social Services works with low-income residents of Hillsborough County. We administer several grant programs. Some you may be familiar with, the LAHEAP and EHEAP program, which administers assistance for low-income households requiring assistance with their utility bills. And then we also have a self-sufficiency program through the Community Service Block Grant, CSBG, where we really do a lot of case management and help families that are looking for long-term goals to be met, and a lot of one-on-one counseling with their case manager to make sure that they're addressing all those barriers to self-sufficiency. I look forward to speaking with you guys today.
Wonderful. Amy?
Jerry, my name is Amy Fenstermacher, and I serve as our Global Grants Management Technology Leader at EY. I had the genuine and immense pleasure of working with Angela and her team in the early days of COVID up to present day. And we were, I would say, in the trenches together, learning and finding new ways of operating and figuring out how to take care of the people around us. it was an incredible experience working with Angela and her team. And I'm so excited to tell you all the stories about the team today, hear from Angela, and share what we know sort of to the best of our knowledge about how we can take all of this forward with us. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Amy. And just a reminder to everybody, if you've got questions, you can put them in the chat. And as we get going here, we can address those. And if we can't get to those questions today, we'll go ahead and follow up with you on those things in another space. But let me give you a little bit of background about the project. Hillsborough County, Florida, engaged EY to establish and operate a program for dispersing a significant amount of COVID-19 related funding to small businesses and individuals during the pandemic. The county had limited familiarity with managing federal grant programs and lacked the staff or capacity to support the operations of such large programs. I know that many of you experienced some of those challenges yourself during that time. EY supported Hillsborough in navigating the complexities of meeting federal compliance rules and helped develop program guidelines and processes for the programs they were going to administer. Together, they completed program design and compliance evaluation. They gathered technical requirements, configured, tested, and deployed the EYGA platform within 6 weeks from contract start. The initial release made the public portal available for applicants to request economic development grants. And then they continued to add functionality through iterative development sprints and released the emergency rental assistance program known as the ERAP, as you may know, several weeks later. The county includes the city of Tampa, which received its own federal CRF funding, and that created additional complexity as Hillsborough County had to carefully manage applications to avoid duplication of benefits for Tampa residents and business owners. This was made possible by the advanced querying and reporting features of the platform they implemented. The public-facing portal and application were made available in both English and Spanish, and additional support from EY included translation of the program documentation into multiple languages, performing application review alongside county employees. When Amy says we were in the trenches, we were elbow to elbow, operating of a bilingual call center for subrecipients and applicants, and providing CARES Act administration, oversight, and reporting to county leadership. Call center was propped up and answered more than 150,000 calls in its first year, with an average call time under 7 minutes. Throughout the pandemic, EY helped Hillsborough County navigate the frequently changing federal guidance. Now, I know that you've all experienced some of that, which often required updating the program design, changing the application questions, or requesting additional information from applicants. The flexibility and configurability of the platform allowed them to make these changes without impacting active programs and applications. The Hillsborough County EYGA portal supports more than 1,000 system users, 30,000 citizens, and thousands of small businesses, and has processed more than 50,000 applications to date. As a result of this effort, Hillsborough County was ranked by the state as one of the top 10 counties for efficiency of grants distribution. This success also led to them receiving and distributing additional federal funding collected from other states and counties that were unable to distribute it. That last part just gives me a little goosebumps. So congratulations to Hillsborough County, not only for being able to push out the funding that was granted to them, but being able to draw down additional funds that could not get out the door elsewhere. That's a way to maximize revenue if I've ever seen it. So we've got a couple questions set up right off the bat. And of course, this first one goes to Angela. Angela, what goes through your mind when your county becomes the recipient of so much federal funding?
Okay, well, this was not only a lot of funding, but don't also forget it was during the pandemic. So we weren't able to gather together like we had been before, you know, like in a war room and dissecting it all, at least not like we could before. Everything was now on Teams and virtual. So at the start of the pandemic, we had already gone through some major changes. We had gone from in-person appointments to virtual-only appointments, all within a few weeks. Everyone was working from home, which had never been done before for our staff. And we also had not only staff and customers, they're learning new technology and communication methods. So when we received the notice of funding, it was with mixed emotions. We were going through so many transitions, learning on how to do business differently, and it felt like it was like at the speed of light. Not only just with the leadership, but like I was saying, the staff and the customers were all relearning the processes and requirements for assistance, all in panic mode. We are social services, so we're used to working with customers in crisis mode, but this was a completely different level of crisis for sure. And like you mentioned, it was a lot of funding, and it was a pretty quick implementation date to get started, considering it was brand new, and we were essentially developing it from scratch based on the program requirements and the county requirements, in addition to what the needs were for our community. It was a lot to go through, and it was a lot to understand pretty quickly. But excuse me, but the demand for services was unbelievable, and it was growing, not only for the tenants, but for the landlords also. So it was snowballing. So we were very eager to implement this program and start assisting households in a way we really could have never done it without this amount of funding. We also had a good foundation or starting point, since we had administered a small pilot internal rent shelter relief program, not with a lot of funding, but internally it was small scale prior to receiving this notice of the funding. And it was at the very onset of the shutdown. It was very rough. We learned a lot from our initial program, and we learned a lot on what we needed to do to help better prepare going forward, which was engaging EY. It was engaging, needing a call center to make sure that we could have those calls managed. The small project we had started with, we were working internally. We were working with the tools we already had in place. So it basically, just to give you an example, day one of that program, the call center we had put up in place with just a few call center reps, completely shut down, like the county call center, because there were so many calls coming in with the demand. So we knew right away that if we were going to launch again, it could not go through just our means and our tools. So engaging and learning from those mistakes was actually helped us work with EY and start from kind of our pain points and what we had already learned to build from there according to the requirements of the grant.
Yeah, you answered half of my next question. I was going to say, is Hillsborough County accustomed to managing federal funds? And are you aware of all the requirements and federal compliance measures? How did you manage that and prepare for any future audits that might come or did come?
So the county does manage federal grants. In particular, social services does receive federal grants, but our grants are a pass-through from the state. During the pandemic, the grant funding for those programs increased significantly, and we received additional funding programs that we also needed to administer. So I think a lot of people probably are familiar with the LIWAP program, which is it's a water assistance program that came up during the pandemic. So we were responsible for administering that program as well. So we are familiar with grant and federal compliance measures. We had never done anything to this magnitude for sure, but we had a good foundation. Like I said before, we're familiar with reporting and program monitoring. Prior to all of this, the pandemic and the funding that we received, our department had already established a compliance unit. So we had already had some internal controls to make sure that we were always reading the grant requirements, reading the county requirements, and making sure that we were following everything. Not to mention, as a department, we also have internal department requirements that we want to make sure that we're staying in. We want to make sure that we're following our own internal policy.
Yeah.
So we've always had those in place, and we've always done the proper amount of controls that we needed to do to review and approve assistance, reporting requirements, so on. Additionally, our department worked closely with the county's clerk controller to ensure that any process we put in place at the very start will meet those compliance standards as well. So it's part of our checklist of what we're doing to start a new program. For this program, we had built the application, the program processes, the system, all of that was based on the federal program requirements and the county's requirements. We had several working groups internally and with EY outlining compliance and building the system that we would be able to have those controls in place. A lot of discussion went around with those for sure, and working with the vendor directly. And like Amy had mentioned, and you had mentioned, Jerry, the compliance and the rules and requirements did change over time. So every time we did get something, we would go back to our working group and the vendor and make sure that we were meeting all those compliance goals. And then lastly, I just want to touch on something we did additionally for this program. The county's internal audit department also was involved from the very start. They were auditing monthly files and applications to make sure that we are staying in compliance. They were pulling random sampling. They were providing quarterly audit memos to our leadership, outlining the program, the compliance details, and the measures that they were doing for their audit. And additionally, this program has also been selected every year, as everyone is probably aware, for the single audit to make sure it's being reviewed and staying up to the compliance requirements as well.
Sounds like you have a good handle on that. Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, I was saying no mercy. But Angela, we had a question, and I know you've told me before, but I've forgotten how much do you normally manage in a regular year, and how much did you get as a result of ERAP and similar programs during COVID?
Yes. So as I mentioned in my intro, I didn't mention ERAP because I knew we were going to be talking about that in greater detail, but we have those 3 grants, and then we also have ad valorem dollars, and all of that combined on an annual basis is less than $10 million. During the pandemic, our grants tripled. So anybody that had CSBG or LAHEAP or EHEAP knows that CARES came on, and we got additional funding for those too. So those programs were being ran simultaneously. So in addition to those tripling, we also received CARES funding, $40 million for shelter assistance for the first round. And then for the emergency rental assistance program, because we pooled our money with the city of Tampa, we received ERAP 1 about $49 million and ERAP 2 $49 million. So a lot, a lot more than what we are usually.
Right. Somewhere between 150 and $200 million. It's insane. And by the way, you didn't mention it, but I distinctly remember at least one hurricane happening, thanks to being in the Florida area during all this. So not only were you doing your regular jobs, not only did you have an enormous sudden budget of money that you were supposed to be responsible for, not only did we have COVID, but then also hurricanes on top of it. So just like some kind of perfect storm.
Storm in Florida.
For sure. And I mean, this is not part of this webinar, but our department actually runs the emergency operations for the county. So when things shut down, we actually move from crisis mode for financial assistance to crisis mode of managing the shelters. We physically go to the shelters and manage them and make sure that people are able to evacuate safely.
So Amy, I have a question for you as an EY leader supporting a county in crisis mode like this and the times and building a new program. Can you give us a sense of what are you thinking? What are you doing? How are you preparing? How are you supporting Hillsborough County?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I'll say is I know I introduced myself as a technology person, but I don't think a single person will disagree with me when I say that technology is not your silver bullet and does not solve all of these problems, right? A lot of this was very human effort. And so the first thing that I was thinking about was, number one, we're going to have to get to know the county and all the people who are working for the county very well so that we can understand and so that we can communicate quickly and effectively and we can make decisions quickly together. And number two, we got to make sure that we have a team that is ready to have those communications. So particularly, Angela mentioned the call center. Our call center team had some fantastic leadership that we pulled in right away, and they were sort of ready to go. They understood the challenge. They've actually been working in Florida for, I think, decades, doing all kinds of support programs and working for the state retirement system. So a team that sort of knew the population, knew the lay of the land very quickly. And then the next piece was that we needed to get a technology in place. Technology is still part of that puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. But we needed a technology in place that could be responsive to the changing environment, right? The changing decisions that were being made, politics still in play at the time, right? Maybe we have to, be flexible when somebody calls up their local representative, and then the councilman comes and says, hey, I want this, challenge to be solved. And so we have to be responsive to that. But ultimately it was, of course, the federal compliance requirements, like Angela mentioned. What I found really interesting and remarkable about this team, that I think maybe people don't always see, there's a lot of news articles about where things went wrong during COVID and how, government didn't get the money out that they should have gotten out, but the enormous amount of dedication and focus and expertise that was employed just to even get money out the door, and not enormous levels of complexity, but complexity just because of the nature of scale and because of the types of money that we're moving, right? No sort of special requirements, but it took so much knowledge and care to do that correctly and thoughtfully. And I think that we really absorbed that quickly from Angela and her team. And then I just, as best we could, reflected that back and reflected it in the technology, reflected it in the language that was used. And again, call center, likewise, just putting a little bit of empathy and recognition for the challenge that we were all collectively facing. So I think that was the big lesson. I also got used to literally reviewing applications for assistance from bed in the morning as I woke up, like on my phone scrolling and seeing things coming up. So that was a strange change that I've adopted since then, unfortunately.
I'm an eligibility worker at heart. I love it.
Right.
So Angela, we've got the Hillsborough County, we've got EY working together, we've got a coordinated effort. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the coordinated efforts that you managed through with the state or other partners or other entities throughout the process?
Sure. So we did meet with the state of Florida to receive its own funding. So we did meet with them to see what kind of efforts we could do to avoid duplication. I would just like to highlight again the big partnership we had, obviously, with EY. I know Amy had said, technology is not the silver bullet, but in this case, we went from in-person appointments only to being virtual within a matter of a couple weeks when the pandemic started, to now having to serve thousands more residents. So the technology for us was huge because we weren't a virtual platform before. We were not an online application. Everything was in person. It wasn't completely manual. We had systems, but so that partnership in itself was something I would definitely want to highlight. As far as other partnerships, another huge benefit was us combining the money with the city of Tampa. Right when we found out the city of Tampa was getting their own funding, the city of Tampa is within county limits. So we orchestrated a partnership to where we would be able to administer their funds. That was not only a huge benefit for us, so we didn't have to worry about a duplication of services or even competing with ourselves to make sure the funding was going out. It was a huge benefit for residents because the city didn't receive as much funding as the county. So customers or residents didn't need to worry about, oh, the city's out of funding, I'm no longer eligible. We pulled it all together. We were able to leverage that funding, and the customers only had to go to one portal, one site for assistance, for information. So it was a huge benefit there for sure. And then we had to work internally for the technology to make sure we were reporting correctly with the city funds and the county funds, because we could only use the city funds for city residents. So that was something that we had to work internally in our process. Another huge partnership is that we partnered with Bay Area Legal Services. It's a free legal service that's in our area. And we created a partnership with them to provide housing stability services. So they work directly with tenants that are facing eviction and having any sort of rental disagreements or challenges with their landlords that could eventually make them homeless, through an eviction. So as we started to work with them, they provided counsel and representation to help stop the eviction. And this partnership was a fantastic enhancement to the program and the services we could provide the tenants, because they jumped in right at the start, engaging the landlord, or in some cases, even the landlord's attorney, to convince the landlord to participate where they wouldn't have in the prior to this service. And then working with Bay Area Legal, we actually started to engage more in a more holistic approach of working with the customers. So instead of it being transactional, you meet all the requirements to get the assistance, looking at, are they getting all of the services that they need in order to be sustainable after this assistance? Are they going to be able to manage financially after this assistance? So we started, shifting gears and looking at the household a little bit differently.
And Angela, if you don't mind me chiming in on this, I think one of the things that was most remarkable to me about that Bay Area Legal partnership is that it's not just like, this is not a big thing, but it's not just the advocacy, but it's also that intervention has now started educating the judges who are hearing these eviction proceedings, so that they understand the resources that the county is offering and where that money is coming from, and are better aware of the process so that they can be more thoughtful about eviction proceedings, which is kind of an amazing sort of change management story as well.
Absolutely. It educated really the entire community.
Yeah.
And everybody, every player that's involved, through this process.
Well, that was my next question. So many people serve, so many partners. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the advertisement or the communications around the program, and how did you reach the people to let them know that this was there and they could come to you?
Sure. We told everybody we could, to be honest with you. We really over advertised at some points, because we really just wanted to make sure everybody knew, and we got everybody involved. Every partner that we've ever met, worked with, or we're gonna meet, we made sure that they knew right at the notice of receiving the funding. To back up a little bit more, the first round of CARES funding, we went and actually started there. We did a MailChimp campaign with all of the people that received the first assistance to let them know that there would be another program coming if they still needed the assistance. So that was really the first wave of advertising we did with this program. And then we're county government, so we do have a county website. It was advertised on the county website, and our county communication department did an excellent job of putting it on every social media platform you can possibly imagine. They had it always on the top of the news articles that our county also has a program to where if you want to receive emails and county news alerts, so they were going out there too through the communications department. We did many news interviews, articles were released. One of the things we did too that I feel like was a game changer was at the start of the program, we met with many landlord associations. We hosted webinars because we knew we're in the business of helping the residents. We've worked with rental assistance programs before, and we knew that if we couldn't get the landlords engaged in this process to understand and want to participate, we wouldn't get anywhere. So we hosted a lot of webinars, worked with the landlord associations to kind of get that buy-in and explain, this is what this is for, this program, and this is how we're going to do this. And we really want to work with you guys to make you guys whole too, while keeping your tenants housed. So that was a huge game changer from the start. We had a lot of partnership meetings, town hall meetings, even though at the start of the program it was virtual. We were doing a lot of engagement that way. And then something very unique that we did a Dollar General receipt campaign. We worked with the local Dollar General stores to have our information and the program details printed on the back of the receipts. So we could just kind of utilize every opportunity we possibly could to get the word out.
We had a question in here from Kristen Weller that says, what does over advertising look like? I feel like you might have answered that. So Kristen, if you have an additional detailed question, I'm happy to ask that. There's another question here. It says, were the funds only dispersed to residents and businesses? Was there any funding awarded to nonprofit partners to help deliver services?
We did it all. We did not, we were actually the subrecipient for the city of Tampa, but we administered the funding by ourselves. What we did do though is engage in, we increased our staffing levels. So we took, like I said before, the call center was taken off our plate. We had the EY call center taking taking that on. The very first round of funding that we received, we did engage with EY to start doing the initial levels of case reviews and application reviews. And then we also had a increase in staffing levels through a staffing agency. So we had several temporary staff, not only doing the application reviews, but actually we did temporary staff with the clerk's office for the comptroller because they issue the payment. So we wanted to make sure at all levels we were staffed at the right level to get the funding out quickly.
Did you disperse funds directly to any individuals receiving services?
We did.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. The large majority was to landlords on behalf of the tenants. But if there were some unique situations to where the landlords would not participate and we did receive all the other requirements that we needed for the program, then we did do the payment directly to the tenant and making sure that the payment paid the tenant applied that payment to rent.
We're on that topic. I have a question. It's probably to both of you, but I'll start with Amy. So Amy, how did we all together ensure that the funds were flowing to the appropriate people for assistance? How did you
Angela?
fortify for waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, I'm laughing because Angela and I spent many an hour on calls together looking through, cases that had strange anomalies or haven't we seen this name before? I swear I've seen it before, and doing like reverse name lookups. And so sometimes it's down to that level, right? One of the challenges in general with funds distribution is that your adversary from a fraud perspective is dynamic and creative because they have a stake in the matter, right? And so unless your response is dynamic and creative, then you're not going to win that battle. So it's sort of a combination of having enough technology that you can see the patterns, you can, pull reports, you can search for things, you can twist the data every which way. So one of the things that we did was we had on every single application that came through, there was a little chart that allowed you to search by multiple different factors of the applications, multiple different data points in the application to see if there were any other applications in the system that matched those. And then the system started automatically saying, these might be matches. Does this look unique? Is this okay? But there's still a human element, right? Little misspellings or anything like that can trip up the checkers. And also there's judgment calls that you need to make, right? Something might look similar, but ultimately you may, with human discretion, decide that it's not the same and therefore sort of passes muster. So ultimately, I think it's a combination of technology to surface enough information to activate the creativity and expertise of the team that can make decisions on that information. And then I will also say that a little bit of it is just having connectivity with your neighbors. So I think we've heard a lot in retrospect about clever campaigns of fraud that stretched across multiple jurisdictions. So being able to share data back and forth with your neighbors can potentially be of huge value in identifying some of those patterns, especially more widespread. Angela, what do you think?
Yes, going back to what Amy said with the system checked for, we had compliance checks at every level. That little chart that Amy spoke of, it not only checked for address, checked for their name, it checked for
household members,
requester name, and then it had a chart that had it would start to pull every application that had that name or address or anything like that, so then we could kind of go through a flow to make sure that there was no duplication. And then the manual checks, we also were looking at every single document that the customers provided us. So when the applicant sent something in, we were looking at every lease, we were looking at every ID, every document that was provided. And then also what Amy said too, sometimes we had to actually get on a call and, start doing some research for some anomalies because something didn't look quite right. And we had to look at things a little bit more. And then one last thing I wanted to say that the county implemented, the county internal audit department, as part of their reviews, they were doing actual follow-ups. So they were looking at the payment and then contacting the landlord that the payment was supposed to go to and not going through what the customer provided is who the landlord, actually doing other checks and making sure that that payment was received by the landlord and it was cashed by the landlord.
Good. I'm going to go back to Kristen's comment because she's got a good one. I used to work in state government, so I also, before coming to EY, so I understand her comment here. She says, we are really great at activating our team and activating our state partners. The challenge we have is understanding our reach into the community, and find that practice change at our level doesn't always get to neighborhoods. So really getting down to the person in the house, in the neighborhood, being the challenge for some of these folks. And so if you have anything else you wanted to add, Angela, to that about how you actually get to a door, I'll take it all the way down to the door on a street. That might be a little bit helpful.
Sure. Are you talking about more of making sure that each individual household's aware of the opportunity?
Yeah.
So we're a little unique in the sense that, like I said, we're social services. We were already doing a rent program prior to COVID. So a lot of the low-income households knew about our services. Of course, as COVID happened, it wasn't just low-income households anymore. The face of who needed assistance did change. So marketing through platforms that reaches everybody, Facebook and Instagram, and doing our county website and doing those web alerts, working with landlords associations, like I said before, that we had never heard of us because they weren't a low income population. Their rent was a lot higher. They're dealing with, different households. So that's how we really got down to that level, that granular level of making sure that everyone was aware. And I don't know if it's like this in every county, but the word of mouth, publicly, it spreads like wildfire very quickly. A lot of people were calling the county call center, calling social services once they knew there was a social service program to find out if there was rental assistance. Not to mention, this program in general did get a lot of news attention that maybe people that didn't know about social services programs knew that funding was coming down to the state level, the city level, the county level. So that was a huge benefit also.
I will say, Angela, I don't know, for all of you who have a mother-in-law who's on Facebook a lot, she sends me little posts that she sees on Facebook all the time. She says, is this real? Can I actually get this free money to pay off my entire mortgage with zero strings attached, right? So I think there were some people who maybe felt like that during COVID, like, oh, this money couldn't possibly be real. I don't know. I don't trust this. So I think, to combat that, I remember members of Angela's team were on the morning news, right, and talking about the program. So there was human faces that were actually communicating this. And I'll say that from the perspective of figuring out whether it's working, right, because you certainly don't want to overspend if you're saturating and enough people know about it to hit that critical mass. But one of the things that I think helps with that is if you're doing especially a rental assistance program, right, you have the addresses that you're touching, which means that you can map them. If you have that data, you can map that data. So we set up some geo mapping so that we could see, right, zoom all the way in, just like you do on Google Maps, zoom all the way in and see where the dollars are going. So you can even see if you've got, some oversaturation in one neighborhood and you're not touching another neighborhood that you expected would be a target neighborhood for these kinds of services. So that's one way to sort of validate and identify what we like to call sort of funding deserts. So just a thought there.
That's a good one. So I'll ask the question of both of you. So after coming through this, and as other states are thinking about their grants management programs, what did you learn from this going forward? What were some of the big challenges that you would want to put out there for people to think about? And what are some of the things that people should take into consideration, like a best practice or something going forward? Just a couple nuggets there from each of you. I'll let Angela go first and then have Amy follow up.
Well, with this situation in particular, nobody could have prepared for the rush of the needs, the demand for it to go out so quickly. The ever-changing environment, the amount of funding, all of that was a huge challenge. but what we have learned is that like a good solid foundation template to work from is really key. Like me and our other county leadership, we actually kind of have a working template we go through for no matter what the program is, large or small, of the steps we need to do, the people, the players, everybody that we would need to put in place to make sure that it's going to be a successful program. Like I said before, we learned a lot and we had the battle scars from that very small, rough program we put together very quickly on our own. And that was our jumping off point. I think that we started off based because of that and knowing those challenges and getting the support from EY and the extra just skill set and the technology, everything else, we started off a lot more successful from day one with the emergency rental assistance program. And using that template, our foundation, our core knowledge of what we need to do for grant requirements, the compliance, everybody that we need to be involved, just kind of having that core group to work from and knowing, first thing you do is look at those grant requirements or the funding requirements and make sure you're going to be able to meet all of those goals. And then you build off from there.
Yeah. Amy?
I think, and even as I was listening to Angela, maybe my answers changed, but let's see how consistent I can make myself. The first one comes from a technology perspective, and it's really that technology is fantastic for automating, for building consistency, for building accessibility, right? So mobile accessibility becoming a critical scenario, right? If you've got folks who are potentially at risk of becoming unhoused or already unhoused. Most importantly, technology creates space for dialogue and negotiation and sort of more value-added human activities. So being able to take off the plate all of the manual tasks that Angela's team was doing so that they could focus on the decision-making, the policy decisions, the design, how to make it more effective, how to reach more people. I think that was a key piece of it. And then I will say, simplification was a huge lesson for us that we sort of continue to absorb and take forward. Angela made gentle reference to the fact that early on, we had some of our folks helping with the application review. What we found, and sort of weren't afraid to say, okay, let's try doing this a different way. We were doing like 6 levels of review for every application. And these applications were, quick turn and fairly small dollar value relative to some of the larger grant programs that you'd see. They weren't $1 million grant applications. So that level of due diligence was simply unmerited. So as we started to see that didn't make sense in context, we all collectively sort of acknowledged, made the pivot and adapted, and eventually picked up the strategy that Angela explained earlier with bringing on some folks from staffing agency that were able to churn through those applications much more quickly. So in that scenario, it was not being afraid to say, let's try this a different way, and then really focusing on sort of radical simplification to the greatest extent possible.
We talked a lot about how technology can help support and accelerate the work. There's a great question in the chat that says, what are some of the key issues you faced with technology and grants management lifecycle? Love it.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, first, Angela, what would you say the issues were?
Well, I was gonna say programmatically, like having an open-ended application amount to come in. Like I said, thousands and thousands of people were needing assistance. So we really had to manage the balance between getting the funding out very, very quickly and how much capacity do we have? We can't have, people need to sleep. Our staff need to sleep. They need to make sure that they have the proper controls in place, that they're looking at things accurately and taking the time to review things. So how many applications can we process in a given amount of time? So that was a challenge with the technology and making sure that we weren't accepting it was just not an open-ended at once, kind of phasing in of how many applications we can process. And we had very early on establish time standards of how long we expected our case managers to have the applications, to work through it, to make decisions, how long we expected the next phase of compiling the application to get it to the clerk controller for payment. So we had some very, very strict timelines because we wanted to make decisions. We wanted to make decisions accurately. We wanted to make them timely. We wanted to get the funding out as quickly as we could. So that was one of the things that we had to talk about very early on for technology, is setting those expectations and capacity levels.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And I had forgotten the fact that you all were the ones who inspired us to create an option to set a limit on the number of applications that would be accepted per day in the system, which we now have as a built-in piece of our platform. So thanks for that. But that was a sort of a fascinating study in just the context of a situation driving how the technology should behave. But I think that that's a great example of the point that I was going to make, which is that, let's say even 10 years ago, right? The challenge was we can't build things fast enough or change things fast enough because it's hard to change the technology. And so that was the challenge we faced, right? Now, we have all of these great low code, no code platforms that are really simple to build. Anyone can use them. It sort of reduces the level of technical skill required. But with great power comes great responsibility, right? So all of a sudden you can build these systems, but now you have the burden of knowing what the impacts and ramifications are of what you're building. So a lot of times I've talked about thinking about it as a system of systems. So it's not just the technology, and if the technology is optimized, then that's the be all and end all, right? We learned early on that if our application form was as simple as it could possibly be, the call center got more phone calls asking questions. So the application form looked nice and pretty and simple, but the call center was overburdened, and that didn't make any sense. So a lot of it was about balancing the technology decisions that we were making with the programmatic or the sort of ecosystem decisions that we were making, and thinking about the ripple effects of some of those technology decisions. And then the last thing I'll say is that when you can automate, there's this sort of compulsion to automate yourself into a corner, right? Where you just end up, you've automated everything, and then some new wrinkle comes along that you didn't expect, and you literally can't use the system that you've over automated and engineered because it doesn't fit into the paradigm that you've designed, right? So so a lot of it is also recognizing through 20 years of experience, thanks Angela, that this kind of thing might change, and so therefore we shouldn't automate this particular facet because we're going to need the flexibility at some point, even if we haven't encountered it yet. So using the balance of experience and knowledge to inform how the technology gets designed, I think is just like incontrovertibly critical to successful use of technology.
This system, or does the system sit alone by itself on the side, or is it integrated into anything within the county?
No, it's not integrated with anything in the county. What we did early on with the first phase of CARES funding, we did integrate those users into the system so that we could have a holistic picture of who's already received assistance. But that's the only systems that really spoke to each other. However, we have county staff, social services, the case managers, but we also have the clerk staff that have access to the system, just different access and user levels. So they're able to do what they need to do on the payment side, and we're able to do the eligibility side. So it is a holistic picture of the entire application. We are able to get payment information in there as well.
Yeah. So Angela, if you think about your grants management processes, environment, administration pre-COVID and now post-COVID, what are some of the glaring differences?
I'm a lot older.
More wrinkles, more gray hairs.
Yes. No, we've learned so much. We've learned, actually, I personally have learned what we can manage, and we've gotten a lot more, I think the confidence and the trust that was built through these programs and through our teams has really put us in a good place moving forward, that we could really handle the next thing that comes to us. Hopefully it's nothing that we've had to experience, but any new funding, any new challenges, we've shown that we can adapt very quickly. And we've learned who we need to contact. We've got good support systems, good technology support that we know we can reach out to when we need to. So I think the partnerships, the experience that we've gained throughout this process, and the trust and the confidence that we've gotten to be able to manage this stuff is really the stuff that'll help us move forward.
It's interesting. I think the word adaptability is probably the most appropriate, because Amy and I worked on an EYGA project as well for childcare during ARPA childcare money for providers, and used a similar approach and similar platform for the same work. And so, Amy, I just thought maybe I'd see if you wanted to talk about the adaptability from this experience. What else have you done that is similar and has been adapted?
Yeah, well, first of all, I will say that it's been a sort of a slow transition, but this is my life now. So I do a lot of this now, which is great, right? It's very rare in your career that you just get to wake up every morning and then actually find ways to help people for a job and get paid for it. So that's pretty nice. And I think many people will sort of resonate with that feeling. I mentioned a few minutes ago that we took one of Angela's team's ideas about being able to control the volume of applications that they accept in a single day. That's a feature on the platform. There are like 20 other things that Angela's team came up with over the course of our time together that we pulled forward and sort of used as core functions of the platform that we use today and that we continue to support. Another one that was really interesting and I think became sort of a critical challenge during COVID with the ERAP program was that's like ATM machine, ERAP with ERAP. It was the concept of having to manage multiple sort of primary stakeholders in the program. So you had the tenants who were requesting assistance, but you also had the landlords who had to provide sort of a key and lock set of information in order to fully process the application in many cases. And obviously there were exceptions for non-participation and all of that, but the sort of the primary path was to have both of those. So what we learned from that was how critical and how valuable it is to have spaces for multiple sort of third parties to any given type of grant or assistance application. And that's something that we've expanded massively since then. Think about inspectors for quality of construction, for example, for programs that fund construction. Think about third-party reviewers or data providers, and then obviously landlords is a perfect example. But just of somebody who needs to provide additional information as context or as validation for anything that's been submitted as part of an application. So that's something that has been replicated tremendously. And then I would say the third thing is that really sort of we learned again, right? The in your face way during COVID was the remarkable importance of mobile accessibility. I remember when Amazon first had their app, I went, this is ridiculous. Nobody's going to buy something on their phone. The picture is this big. You can't even see what it is. No one's going to buy it. And boy, have I eaten my words on that. But now, I mean, having the ability to do everything via mobile is a massive game changer for accessibility. So the project that Jerry mentioned that she and I worked on together, one of the things that we realized early on was that these childcare providers that we were targeting with funding didn't seem like there was a lot of uptake with the funding. And at some point, I think it was a woman who was a recent mother on our team said, hey, have we ever thought about how hard it might be for them to have like one child on one arm and one child grabbing at their leg and they're trying to fill out a grant application? And we realized maybe if we made it a little bit easier, a little bit more mobile accessible, that they would actually be able to participate more easily and successfully. So I think we sort of keep absorbing and learning those human lessons along the way too, which has been just a fascinating growth experience.
I was going to ask this earlier. We have one more question in the chat. We've got 5 minutes left, and this is a really important one. It says, are you required to share grant or impact data reporting requirements to state federal agencies, and do you have the tools to achieve it?
Yes, we are required for all of our grants and programs. We are required to provide that information, and we have, like I mentioned before, we have people in place for our reporting features, our compliance features. So we have those controls in place that I was mentioning before. Somebody that's preparing the report, reviewing the report, approving the report, making sure that all that data lines up with the compliances, and then we're able to share it with the funder as needed.
All right, Amy, anything on reporting you would like to add?
I will just say two
Favorite
things.
space?
Yeah, right. There are two things that I'll say on that. One is obviously because of the fact that the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County pooled their funding together, we had to be able to report on those two pieces sort of distinctly and be able to tell which dollars went where. So that was a key part of it. And that was a design decision early on, right? Knowing that those dollars were going to be pooled and we needed to be able to prevent sort of the risk of commingling. The other thing is just sort of a comedic thing, which is that, and many of you may have had to experience this, that the guy who had to do some of the submission of the reports kept complaining that they were literally asking for his social security number, and he was worried that it was all going to come back on him if if anything was found amiss. So we were all extremely careful to make sure that the data ticked and tied correctly to preserve his social security number.
Yeah.
On top of the success that Hillsborough County had, which is obvious, I can also see that there's a good friendship built here, and I'm sure among many of the team members. So in chaos, usually we become friends. So thank you very much to Hillsborough County for working with us, choosing us, and being our friends. And thank you, Amy, for taking the time out to share your experience with Angela. And thank you all who have attended the webinar today. I think we answered all your questions, and hoping that you received really great information. And it looks like we're going to give you 3 minutes back before you have to go to your next meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Angela. See you soon.